On a special world over, Rick Warren, pastor of Saddleback, and Bishop Kevin VANN of the Diocese of Orange recently joined forces to address the issue of mental health and the church's response to it. I spoke with them both in exclusive interviews and explored the personal tragedy that gave birth to this collaboration. A special encore of the world over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Rick Warren and Bishop Kevin VANN are straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's program, send us a tweet at Raymond Arroyo, or you can drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Lots to bring you. Let's get right to it. Studies show that mental illness will affect 1 in 4 American adults at some point in their lives. So where can they go for help? My next guests joined forces in March of this year to answer that question. Rick Warren, pastor of Saddleback Church, is the author of the single most successful book after the Bible, The Purpose-Driven Life. In an exclusive interview, I spoke with Warren about the event that he says made him a new man and gave him a new message of hope for those who are grieving and in pain. For the first time, Bishop Kevin VANN of the Catholic Diocese of Orange and Rick Warren sponsored a conference together on the church and mental illness. Here's an encore of that discussion.
65% or so of people who have these struggles, the first place they come, as you said, is to the faith community, to the church. So our day here together is, I hope, a time for us. How can we see this as not just an incidental phone call that we get, but how can it be weaved into our life and our ministry, because it's present every place. So how can we be a more effective response of faith to folks who struggle? Jesus walked and healed and was with folks in the midst of all these difficulties.
Yeah. One of the things we want to say right here up front, because some of you are struggling, many of you struggle with different mental illnesses, and many of you are in families. And I just want to say this day is going to be a day of hope. This day is going to be a day of hope, and you're going to be glad you came here. You're going to leave encouraged, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to help you. It's one of our goals.
And it's a day of hope because we're in solidarity together in this common mission and purpose, and bring the light of our faith to all these struggles.
Yeah.
For Rick Warren, this mission is personal. A year ago, Rick and Kay Warren's son, Matthew, committed suicide. The tragedy has given new impetus to Warren's ministry and message. Your son, Matthew, took his life.
He did.
And it has really renewed your focus on caring for those with mental illness, depression, suicidal thoughts. Tell me what you and Kay did when Matthew came to you, and he came repeatedly, and he said things like, and I'm quoting you, "Why can't I just die and end the pain?"
Right. Well, in that particular case, he said, "Dad, I love the Lord. I know I'm going to heaven. Why do I have to stay here on earth and go through this pain?" He said, "It's real clear I'm not going to be healed. The doctors and the medicines aren't working." Matthew struggled from babyhood with mental illness, and we watched for 27 years. He had a tortured mind and a tender heart. Wonderful. Man, I just heard a story today about where he worked. He was working at a warehouse, and a woman posted this on Kay's Facebook today. She said, "My daughter went through a major depression, and that day she was so depressed she got under her desk at work and was just sitting there. Matthew walked over and sat down under the desk with her for over an hour. This is incarnational love. He had an incredibly tender heart. I've never seen anybody like him. He could walk into a room, and at a party he would know instantly who was in major pain. And while I would go and meet everybody in the room, and at the end, my other son, Josh, and I, we'd know everybody in the room, Matthew would focus on one because he was in so much pain. And when he said, "Why can't I just die?" I said, "Well, Matthew, you may want to give up hope, but as your daddy, I cannot give up hope." And I never will stop believing that there can be a turnaround. And our prayer, we known from his birth that we were going to someday be spokespeople for mental illness, because God doesn't waste a hurt. He wants to use it in our life. but we kept it pretty quiet. During
out of his privacy to him.
It was his story to tell, and to protect his dignity. Our prayer was either A, he would be healed through prayer, or B, he would get the medication and the doctors that could help him manage his illness for the rest of his life. And so when that week that Matthew took his life, of course, was the worst week of my life, and I called it the Battle for Hope. It was 5 days after Easter. And what had happened is I had just preached Easter service. I'd preached a message called The Hope of the Resurrection. I had done it, preached it 14 times to 55,000 people, and I was exhausted. Monday, I announced publicly that I was writing the first book since Purpose-Driven Life, and it was going to be called The Hope You Need, based on the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. So then on Tuesday, I announced that after saying no for 32 years, I was actually going to start a radio program. I said no for 32 years, and we were going to call the radio program, and it's going now for a year, Daily Hope. Now you can see a pattern: the hope of the resurrection, the hope you need, daily hope. Wednesday, I announced that week that I was going to start a new sermon series on dealing with hopeless times. Thursday, Christianity Today did a major article on our big missions peace project called Rick Warren's Final Frontier, Taking Hope to the World. And Friday, I got up and I felt like my chest was caving in. And Kay said, "Do you think you're having a heart attack?" I said, "No, I think I just got bronchitis." And so my associate chief of staff took me to the doctor, and he said, "You've got pneumonia in both lungs." And so I called my associate pastor, said, "Tom, you're going to have to preach this weekend." I was planning to preach on what to do when you're under attack, 2 Chronicles 20. But I said, I want you to preach not that passage, but out of Samuel, the passage where David goes to his town of Ziklag, and they've killed all the men, and they've taken all the women and children captive, and they burned down the town, and David grieves. And I said, I want you to do a message called What to Do on the Worst Day of Your Life. Not knowing that night would be the worst day of my life. Now, it was like, you could see it, hope, 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 and then my son takes his life in despair. The day that my son took his life, the message that was being broadcast on my Daily Hope program was called Winning the Battle for Your Mind. And it was a very devastating time. It was the day I'd prayed would never happen and the day that I feared since his birth.
Because you all grappled with this for a long time, as so many families do. And you seek medical help.
Right.
You try to surround them with love and support. And even right up until the end, he had dinner at your house?
Oh, we had a great relationship. The night before, he come over and watched TV. If love could have healed his mental illness, he would have been healed. If I could think, if medicine, we had the best doctors in the nation, okay, because we would go to the top clinics, the UCLA, and all of the great schools, but we just couldn't get it there. And, you know, it's interesting that when, of course, this became big news because I'm a pretty public person, and it was all around the world, and I began to get letters. We probably received 35,000 letters of condolences. And Ray, honestly, the letters that meant the most to me were not the ones from prime ministers and presidents and rock stars. The ones that meant the most to me were people who Matthew had led to faith in Christ. And people would say, I'm going to be in heaven because of your son. And I remember writing in my journal that day, in God's garden of grace, even broken trees bear fruit. And we're all broken. We all have a little mental illness. Many people think mental illness means you're insane. Matthew was not insane, okay? But people have struggled with compulsions, with fears, with panic, with anger issues,
depression.
With deep depression, clinical depression.
Have you ever been depressed?
Oh yeah, I went through an entire year of depression in 1981, and that was the second year of this church, and my goal was not, oh God, build a great church. My goal was, God, can I get through Sunday? And I learned some lessons in that. Actually, the last Sunday of the first year of Saddleback Church, I stood up to preach and I fainted.
Oh my God.
In front of everybody. And I was just exhausted, emotionally, physically, spiritually, working 18 hours a day. And I took my wife and kids out to the desert where her parents lived in Phoenix, and I went out and had my desert experience for a month in the Arizona desert. And out there, the Lord taught me some things that prepared me to pastor a church that now has 140,000 names on the roll. It's like a city. I have 400 staff. We have campuses in Hong Kong and Berlin and Manila. I could not have done that without the lessons that I learned through that year of being under the cloud.
What was the lesson you learned over those almost 5 months of exile, self-exile?
It was my
You
brief
were mourning.
sabbatical.
You were mourning.
Exactly.
What did you learn out of that moment?
When Matthew died, I took the next 4 months. I spent hours a day just in solitude or with Kay, thinking, praying, reflecting. You can't spend that much time with God and it not change you. I'm not the same man I was a year ago. I have the same personality, but I have a new understanding of Jesus, a new understanding of God's purpose in our lives. Hopefully a new sympathy for people in pain.
Did you ever doubt your faith and wonder why would God allow this after all I've listened for, all I've tried to do in my life?
Well, no, I've never doubted God. I doubted His wisdom. Okay. In other words, it's like my kids. My kids have never doubted that they had a father, and they've never doubted that their father loves them. They have often doubted my wisdom. Do you know what you're doing? And actually, in times of grief, we go from shock to sorrow, and then this third stage is what I call struggle. And that's when you ask the why questions. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking why. Even Jesus asked why on the cross. My God, why? Okay? But the test is, what do you do when you don't get an answer? Because you're not going to get the answer on this side of eternity. We're not going to know the whys. Part of it is we don't have the brain capacity. It's like an ant trying to understand the internet. The ways of God will be fully understood in eternity. But what do you do when you don't get the answer? You go to stage 4, which is surrender. And that's where peace is. And I remember writing in my journal, I'd rather walk with God and not have my questions answered than have all my questions answered and not walk with God. See, Ray, what we think when we're in pain, we immediately try to find an explanation.
Get out of it.
Yeah, but explanations don't satisfy. Explanations don't comfort. If my wife were to drop dead tomorrow and I knew why she died, it wouldn't make it any less painful. So explanations don't, we waste too much time. What gives us comfort is the presence of God, the Holy Spirit indwelling in our lives. That's what comforts us, not the explanations.
48% of evangelicals in a poll said that prayer and reading the Bible alone could cure and should cure mental illness.
Yeah, I saw that statistic. I don't agree with it. And those were probably by people who don't have a mentally ill person in their family. Okay, that would be somebody who would expect, you know, it's easier to make quick decisions from a distance. And that's really part of a matter of explanation and education. And that's part of what Kay and I intend to do.
Tell me about this gathering on mental health in the church. This is a collaboration between you and Bishop VANN here in the Orange Diocese.
Diocese of Orange, yeah.
First time you all have done anything together.
Yeah, when Bishop VANN, Bishop Tod retired and Kevin VANN came from Fort Worth, Cardinal Dolan called me and said, this is a good guy. And I knew he was I had done my seminary in Fort Worth. And so I went to his installation as bishop, and we became dear friends, and we actually became prayer partners.
The Warrens' tragedy brought these prayer partners even closer. Bishop Kevin VANN.
Then when his son committed suicide, I called him. And I would really call he and Kay just to check in on them monthly, every couple of weeks. They didn't have to respond back, but I called them. So he and I began to talk about all this afterwards. And so we kind of thought together, given the good relationships that are here in Orange County anyway between churches, how can we do something together?
We said, well, let's do a one day on the church and mental illness.
And what do you hope will be the result of this?
Well, a number of things. First, we want to start the conversation. We want to say it's okay to talk about mental illness. We want to open up the door a little bit wider. Mental illness in many ways is kind of like AIDS. There's a stigma attached to it. People don't want to talk about it. Now, I don't understand this when you think about it. If my liver doesn't work and I take a liver pill, there's no stigma to it. If I have lung cancer and I take cancer medicine, no stigma. If I have diabetes, no stigma. But if my brain doesn't work and I take a pill, why am I supposed to be ashamed of that? Your brain is simply another organ. And when the brain doesn't work, it doesn't work. And you know what? To tell someone with mental illness, you're depressed, just be happy.
Right.
Just try to think about it. Get over it. That's like telling a bird with a broken wing, just believe you can fly. It's not going to fly. The wing is broken. And when those neural pathways are broken, it's going to take more than just positive thinking and a good attitude. There are relational issues and physical issues and biological issues. They're all involved, but spiritual too.
Tell me about the Matthew Warren Fund that you're starting.
Yeah, well, we're not going to actually name it after him. We just used his name at the start, which was to invite people to give to help people with mental illness around the world. And really our goal as a pastor, of course, my belief is this belongs in, through, and to the church. I believe that the local church, the local parish, is the hope of the world, is the answer to all of our issues, because it has distribution, it has more volunteers, it has local credibility.
It's where people go when they're in struggle.
When people have mental illness, they don't call the police first. They don't call a lawyer first. They don't call a doctor first. They call their parish. And the first person is not even the priest. The first person is that receptionist.
The conference is how to help and equip, say, pastoral workers, church workers, parish workers, to be able to respond in a way that's helpful to make good referrals and appropriate referrals. Because so often when they would come or call, you don't know what to do.
And so we want to train church leaders first how to do triage on mental illness. First responders, exactly. We want to remove the stigma. We want to share resources. We want to begin the conversation to say, look, this is not anything new. There's a biblical reason, and there is a historical reason, and there's a practical reason for this. First, biblically, Jesus cared about the sick. The Bible tells us Jesus went into every village preaching, teaching, and healing. Okay, so 1/3 of his ministry is health care. So the audacity of the government trying to tell us how to do health care. Are you kidding me? The church has been in the healthcare business 2,000 years longer than any government, all right? The church invented the hospital. Most people don't know that. That's true. We invented it. And you go to any country, the first school and the first hospital are always started by missionaries, Christian missionaries who are doing it because of our teacher, healer, savior, Jesus. So this is not like something we're inventing. The church has been doing this for 2,000 years. So Jesus did it. Historically, Christians have done it. And then practically, it's the place people go to first.
When we return, part 2 of my exclusive interview with Pastor Rick Warren. And wait until you hear what his favorite TV program is. Later, my one-on-one chat with Bishop Kevin VANN. The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. We're about to bring you an encore presentation of the second part of my exclusive interview with Rick Warren. I sat down with him in his offices in Southern California to discuss the origins of his mega best-selling book, The Purpose-Driven Life, his successful Saddleback ministry, and the channel he watches more than any other. Here's the conclusion of my conversation with Rick Warren. The Purpose-Driven Life is the best-selling book in the world. 36 million plus copies. It's been translated more than any book except the Bible. What is the key to that success? Why were so many people touched by that book and continue to be?
You know, Ray, there's not a single new thought in Purpose-Driven Life that hadn't been said for 2,000 years. I just said it in a fresh way. I said it in a simple way. When I was writing Purpose Driven Life, it took me 7 months, 12 hours a day. I'd get up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd go to a little study, start at 5 a.m. I was fasting till noon, and I would light some candles, and I would start writing and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And one of the things I did before I wrote the book was I asked the question, how do you write a book that lasts 500 years? For instance, Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis.
Right.
Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Okay, the Desert Fathers, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, all of these great classic devotional works. And one of them, I just realized that in order to be timeless, you have to be eternal.
What is your secret to reaching people every day, every week, not only in your writing, but when you speak to them? What is it? What is this communication gift, if you will, if you could decode it? Because a lot of preachers would like to know.
Well, Jesus said, I'll make you fishers of men. And I like this fishing motif. And I think the first thing is you have to go where the fish are. Okay, they're not in church. You got to go into the marketplace. You got to learn to think like a fish. You've got to know what they like to eat. You've got to drop the bait at the right level. You use all kinds of, Paul says, I become all things to all men that I'm in some way save some. So he say, when I'm with Jews, I become like a Jew to reach Jews. When I'm with Gentiles, I become like Gentile to reach Gentiles. Today he'd say, when I'm in California, I'd become a Californian to reach Californians.
I should have left the tie at home. Is that what you're saying, Rick?
Yeah, right. Well, and the main thing is love always reaches people. Authenticity, humility. Pope Francis is the perfect example of this. He is doing everything right. You see, people will listen to what we say if they like what they see. And as our new Pope, he was very, very symbolic in, you know, his first Mass with people of AIDS, his kissing of the disformed man, his loving the children, this authenticity, this humility, the caring for the poor. This is what the whole world expects us Christians to do. And when they go, oh, that's what a Christian does. In fact, there was a headline here in Orange County, and I love the headline. I saved it. It said, if you love Pope Francis, you'll love Jesus.
That was the headline?
That was the headline.
Oh.
It was the headline. I saved it. I showed it to a group of priests I was speaking to a while back.
I love that. I want to take you back a little bit before we talk about your ministry and
Sure.
the things you're doing and have been doing and the example it has set for so many. Sure. Tell me about Jimmy and Dot Warren and how you see them, the librarian and the Baptist minister, reflected in your life now and in your work now.
Well, my parents were very gentle, humble, poor people. They did not have a whole lot of money. We were in rural churches. My dad never pastored a church more than about 150 people. They were very, very generous people, loving people. And they really taught me, my dad taught me how to get along with either a drunk on the side of the street or a king. He could be as comfortable with a pauper or with a politician.
And your mother taught you a love of things written.
She did. My mother was a librarian, and prior to that, she was a bookstore manager at a seminary. And so as a bookstore manager, she would get a free copy of each of the books. My dad had a pretty good sized library, and when I was ordained, my dad gave me, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 volumes himself. I began collecting books at 14. I used to read a book a day. I read a book a day for many years. Today, I've probably got 35,000 volumes in my library.
I want to peek at that library one of these days. I want to talk about you and Kay, your wife Kay, for a moment. In reading her book, I was kind of surprised by this. She talks about both you and she, after now 40 years of marriage, just about, right? That when you first met, you all were not really attracted to each other. Not at all. What was it that then caused this marriage? She called those early years awful.
Well, I won't say that our honeymoon was hell on earth, but it was pretty difficult. My wife and I are exact opposite in every single cell of our bodies except our love for Christ and our love for each other. And we were in love, but in early years we just didn't get along. And what happened was Kay and I got engaged, and right after we got engaged, I moved to Japan as a short-term missionary to help plant a church in Nagasaki, Japan. She moved to Birmingham, Alabama to work in an inner city multiracial church. And so we were apart the entire engagement. I would never tell anybody to do what we did. So when we got married, it was like we were in love, but now who are you?
Yeah.
And so all the things we needed to work out in early marriage or in early dating, we had to work out in early marriage. And
but Rick, she was dating your friend. You all weren't even attracted to each other, but you felt it was a sort of a divine call?
Oh, it was. In fact, I'll never forget, I was actually speaking in her father's church. She was playing the piano. My best friend was leading worship music. And I remember sitting there on stage getting ready to speak, and I looked over her, and clearly a voice in my mind, I mean, it wasn't audible, but it could have been audible. It was as clear, said, "You're going to marry that girl." Now, I immediately doubted that for 3 reasons. Number one, God has never spoken to me that clearly before or since, ever. Really? Okay, it was that clear. Second, I wasn't in love with her. And third, she was in love with my best friend. So after God said that to me, I just filed it away, made no attempt to even date her. And we were going to the same Christian college when school started again in the fall. I had a prayer partner who every morning at 5 a.m. we would get up and go out to the baseball dugout, and we would pray from 5 to 6 a.m. every day, and we never missed a day for a year. One day, several months into that, in the middle of the prayer, Danny stops. He says, "Rick, you're going to think this is strange, but I have this sensation that you're going to marry Kay Lewis." And I said, "Well, don't worry about that. God told me that 5 months ago." And we just keep on praying. And it's a long story, but we ended up together, and we're now 38 years in marriage. My wife is my best friend. I'm hopelessly in love with her.
I came across something that I found remarkable, particularly given you and Kay's success over the years, the growth of Saddleback, 22,000 people in this congregation. You give when the purpose-driven life hit, you gave your salary back, not only for that year, but for 25 years. You do something called reverse tithing. What is that?
When Kay and I first got married 38 years ago, we started tithing, giving 10% of our income to the Lord and to the Lord's work. And we decided that each year we would raise our tithe. Now, nobody told us to do this. We just wanted to be more generous. Every time I give, I break the grip of materialism. The way you get rid of getting is giving. Every time I give, my heart grows bigger, and every time I give, I become more like Jesus. The Bible says God so loved the world that he gave. So you can give without loving, but you can't love without giving. So at the end of our first year, we raised our tithe to 11%, the end of the second year to 12%. Third year, we raised it 3%. On years that our finances were very tight, we just raised it 1/4% when the cupboard was bare and I was a poor seminary student. And on years we'd get a raise or had something happen, we'd raise it 3 or 4%. And then over the years, we've been married 38 years. Last year, we raised it another percent from 90 to 91. And I've been playing this game or deal with God for 38 years where God says, "Rick, you give to me and I'll give to you and we'll see who wins." I have lost it every year.
Oh, that's amazing.
And there's really a great joy and generosity.
I want to talk about generosity and this peace plan that you implemented. Tell people about this and that trip to Rwanda in 2005.
Yeah, exactly. It all started when Kay was reading an article on HIV/AIDS. And she saw an article, I think it was Time or Newsweek, that said 14 million children orphaned by AIDS. And she was sitting on the couch and she said, "I was so shocked I had to drop the magazine." She said, "I had to realize I don't know a single orphan." She says, "In my bubble of American suburban life, I don't know a single orphan." And she felt like the Holy Spirit said to her, "Okay, you can do one of two things. You can let this pain into your heart and I'll make you a spokesman for vulnerable women and children and orphans and people who have HIV/AIDS, or you can shut it down and continue as a pastor's wife, soccer mom, Bible teacher." My wife's the most courageous woman I ever have met. And she said, I don't know anything about AIDS, but I'm going to learn about it. And so she began to go to Africa, she said, because they know more about it than we do. For instance, we learned more women have AIDS than men. I didn't know that. We learned that a lot of babies get AIDS through a mother's milk. I didn't know that. And so while she went to Mozambique and Malawi, this was 2003, I went to Johannesburg and I taught in South Africa a leadership conference. And so after it was over, I said, "Take me out to a village. I want to see a typical church." I said, "I don't care what it is. evangelical, Catholic, Lutheran, charismatic, doesn't matter to me. So we go out and we find this little church in a village, no water, no electricity, in a tent. And it's 75 people, 50 adults, 25 kids orphaned by AIDS. And I looked at this and I thought, this church is doing more to help the poor than my rich mega church in California. And it was like a knife in my heart, and I said, that's going to change. And I remember it was 50 adults and 25 kids orphaned by AIDS. The kids are sleeping in the tent at night. They're schooling the kids. They grow in a garden to feed the kids. And the young pastor walks around, and he sees me. Now, he didn't know I'm coming. He says, I know who you are. And I said, how do you know who I am? He said, you're Pastor Rick. I said, how do you know who I am? He said, I download your free sermon every week. I said, now you're in a village with no water and no electricity. How are you downloading my sermon every week? He said, they're putting the internet in every post office in South Africa. They're called PITs, Public Information Terminals. He said, once a week, I walk an hour and a half to the nearest post office. I download your free sermon, I walk an hour back, and I teach it to my people. He said, you know, Rick, you're the only training I've ever had. Ray, that was a turning point in my life. I said, I'll give the rest of my life for people like that. And I've spent most of the last decade in little villages around the world you've never heard of, helping these barefoot evangelists, these priests, these pastors, these deacons, these ministers, these bishops who are serving faithfully when I have so much and they have so little. And out of that, we developed the Peace Plan, P-E-A-C-E, and it's based on Jesus saying, when you go into a village, find the man of peace. And PEACE stands for plant churches, equip leaders, assist the poor, care for the sick, educate the next generation. Now today, I've sent 23,869 of my members overseas to 196 nations. So we've done the Peace Plan in all 196 nations.
When I look at this, the sweep of it, when I hear stories from people on the ground in these countries about your work, they all say, you know, Rick Warren is truly non-denominational. He's focused on Christ exclusively.
If you love Jesus, we're on the same team.
But this is an anomaly in many areas of Christianity.
For many people,
But what is the obstacle, do you think? Keeping Christians apart and away from that unity that Christ prayed for, that John Paul II was such a vocal, well, all the recent popes.
Absolutely.
Have
every one of them.
Done this outreach.
Every
we
one
need
of
to be
them.
one.
Exactly.
What is keeping these communities apart, and what do you think is bringing them together?
Well, I think we need to go back to the words of St. Augustine. You know, in the essentials, you know, we have unity.
Right.
In the non-essentials, we have liberty. And in all things, we show charity. And I think this is really true. Now, I think as the world becomes increasingly, particularly the Western culture, more secular, more anti-Christian, we're seeing, for instance, religious liberties being threatened and things like that. It is really incumbent on all Christians of every brand and stripe that we join together on the things that we share in common. And when I say, do you believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? Yes. Do you believe Jesus Christ rose? Yes. Do you believe he died on the cross? Yes. Do you believe in hell and heaven? Yes. Do you believe the Bible's God's word? Yes. Then we're on the same team. We might not agree on all of the minors, but we are Christians. And here's the thing. People don't realize how big the church really is. It's the largest organization on planet Earth. We don't have anything to apologize for. There's 600 million Buddhists in the world. There are 800 million Hindus in the world. There are about 1.5 billion Muslims, but there are 2.3 billion Christians who would say, I believe Jesus is who he claimed to be, the Son of God. That means 1 out of every 3 people on this planet. The church is bigger than China. The church is bigger than China and India put together. Nothing is big, and we have more outlets. I could take you to 10 million villages around the world. The only thing in it is a church. That's why there is no global problem, poverty, disease, illiteracy, or whatever, that can be solved without the church.
You recently wrote a piece, let's talk about this, in the Washington Post about this HHS mandate and the Supreme Court arguments, the oral arguments we just heard vis-a-vis this Hobby Lobby case. You know David Green.
Very well.
Tell me about what so incenses you about this entire controversy, And might it be, Rick Warren, that the church itself, this is controversial, created this situation, this right to worship, because they for so long have kept their values confined to the four walls of their churches?
Yes, exactly. Well, there's a difference between freedom of worship and freedom of religion. Worship is an event that happens inside the house of worship. Religion is a lifestyle. It is a way of living. It is what I base my decisions on at home, at work, and everything else. It's where it colors everything in my life, the way I educate my kids, the way I do my ethics at work, the way I treat my neighbor. The Constitution does not guarantee freedom of worship. It guarantees freedom of religion. And this is what I call America's first freedom, because the first phrase of the first sentence of the First Amendment is, Congress shall make no law concerning, imposition on religion. In other words, the freedom of religion. America was founded by religious people, devout people who came here because they wanted freedom of religion. It's what made America different from every other country. And so it is our first freedom. It comes before the freedom of speech. It comes before freedom of the press. It comes before freedom to assembly. It comes before the right to bear arms. Why? Because none of these other freedoms matter if you don't have the freedom to believe and to practice your belief.
Where do you think the Supreme Court's going to go on this?
My prayer, and I believe that the Supreme Court will come down on the side of the First Amendment. I said in that article that I used to own, Jefferson had two very famous letters on religious liberty. One was to the Danbury Baptist, where he talks about the phrase separation of church and state. Now, it's interesting that phrase today means the exact opposite of what it meant in Jefferson's days. Today, people think it means keeping religion out of government or out of politics. But actually, the separation of church and state was, we're going to protect the church
from the government.
From the government. I believe that religious liberty may be the civil rights issue of the next decade. And if it takes some high-profile pastors going to jail over it, like Martin Luther King did over civil rights, I'm in. So be it. I mean, as Peter said and the apostle said, we must obey God rather than men.
Do you think events like this, moments like this, are actually sources of unity and moments of unity, particularly for Catholics and evangelicals?
Sure. Well, obviously, we have so much in common in protecting our religious rights and really the religious rights of other people who we disagree with on beliefs and behaviors. Muslims, for instance, don't drink alcohol. If all of a sudden they made a law that said every Muslim restaurant has to serve alcohol, I would be there protesting with that. If they made a law that said every Jewish deli in New York City has to sell pork, I'm going to be there protesting. I don't have a problem with pork, but I'm going to protest that. If they make a law that says every Catholic school has to provide contraceptives, if you're morally convinced you shouldn't have contraceptives, I stand with you, firm with you on your belief on that, because you have a right to train your children the way you want to.
Tell me about the little breather you take in the day when you watch television, which surprised me. When we first met, you came up to me and said, "Hey, Raymond," and I said, "I can't believe you watch this show."
You know what? I'm an avid fan of EWTN. I make no bones about it. I probably watch it more than any Christian channel because I happen to like. Well, you know what? Because you have more shows that relate to history, and if you don't understand the roots of our faith, that God has been working for 2,000 years, regardless of what brand of believer you are, God has been working for 2,000 years in His church. And if you don't have those roots, you're like the cut flower syndrome, or you're a tumbleweed. One of my favorite shows, which you repeat often, is the Chaplet of Divine Mercy.
Really?
Which I love, and when I've had a very stressful day, I'll come home, I've got it taped, and Kay and I will both listen, we'll put it on and just sit back, relax, worship, and in that time of reflection, meditation, quietness, I find myself renewed and restored. So thank you for continuing to replay the Chaplet of Divine Mercy.
Thank Mother Angelica.
Thank you, Mother Angelica.
When I walked into your office here, I was struck. You have 3 images and personal notes that confront the person walking into your office, which I have to say was a lot smaller and more humble than I ever thought. I thought we'd get this spacious, palatial office.
Yeah, I'm
it's
not
a very
much
humble
into bling.
office. And there is Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Billy Graham. Why those three? What do they give you, and what have they given you?
The only one who's missing was Pope John Paul II. Those four people were the greatest influences on the 20th century, without a doubt, without a doubt. And each of them represent lessons that I've tried to learn. Mother Teresa, I had the privilege of writing the foreword to a book honoring the 100th anniversary of her birthday. And she wrote me, there's that note in there that says, be holy for God is holy and he loves you. And Mother Teresa taught the world that the face of Jesus is seen in the poor, that we need the poor. Not only do the poor need us, we need the poor. And God has chosen, does God have favorites? Yes, he does. He loves the poor. There are over 2,000 verses on the poor in the Bible. And God says, you care about the poor, I'll care about you and your needs. So Mother Teresa taught that. Billy Graham was one of my 9 mentors. All of my mentors are now passed on in heaven, except Billy. He's 95. I went to his 95th birthday. Billy Graham taught me how to be a Christian statesman. He taught me how to relate to people of different faiths, relate to world leaders. And he also taught me about how to maintain moral integrity. And the Billy Graham Association created a list of things that they said we will not do. And I copied that and expanded it 33 years ago, and everybody on my staff signs it. Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Billy Graham each teach humility, integrity, generosity, and they teach values and being willing to suffer for your faith.
Do you find it difficult being identified as America's pastor? Is there a weight having that moniker attached to what you do day in and day out?
Well, it means nothing to me. I don't, what people want to say is really up to them. What really matters to me is the individual. And if notoriety allows me to influence people and point them to Jesus, that's what it's all about. You know, Ray, when I wrote Purpose-Driven Life, I wanted to start this book with the most counterculture statement I could possibly think of.
You found it.
and you know, so I chose the phrase, it's not about you.
Not about you,
The 4-word march, it's not about you. And really, that's like a slap in the face in the me generation where everything in our culture says, it's all about you. Okay, it's all about me, how I look, how I feel, what I want to do. It's my life, it's my body, it's my money. And when I say it's not about you, it's really about the most counterculture thing you could say. What I didn't know was how often I was going to be tested on that statement once I said it. It's not about you. And I often have to say that phrase 8 or 9 times a day. When I'm criticized unfairly, it's not about you. When I'm praised, it's not about you. When people misunderstand me, it's not about you. When people challenge me or question my motivation, it's not about you. And I have to say that I had no idea how many times God was going to test me on that the rest of my life.
Now, are you sorry you wrote it?
No. Not at all.
Thank you, Rick Warren.
Thank you, Ray, and God bless all EWTN viewers, and thank you, Mother Angelica, for having a vision, a spry little woman who said, it can be done when everybody said it couldn't be done, a tower of faith.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
My next guest became Bishop of the Diocese of Orange in 2012, after previously serving as the Bishop of Fort Worth, Texas. I sat down with him recently to talk about his hands-on style of ministry, as well as his biggest project yet, transforming the iconic Crystal Cathedral into Christ Cathedral. As you may have heard, EWTN will have a presence at the cathedral when it opens its first West Coast studio there later this year. Here's an encore of my exclusive interview with Bishop Kevin VANN. Tell me, how does a lab technician from Illinois end up in the land of Disney and Saddleback Mountain?
Do you know, Raymond, I've asked myself that many questions. Growing up in Central Illinois, as a child, I'd watch Sunday, The Wonderful World of Color with Walt Disney.
Sure.
At the same time, it'd be at my grandparents' house, and my grandmother would watch Fulton Sheen.
Oh, boy.
You know, so I had all these visions of various things, and all of a sudden, years later, I'm here kind of connected with all that because Fulton Sheen was a good friend of Reverend Schuler as well.
That's right, and preached here. We're
Preached
on
here.
the former Crystal Cathedral campus, now the Christ Cathedral campus of the diocese, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, you have been here in Orange for a little over a year.
Right, year and 3 months.
Just barely. How is this different from Fort Worth, Texas, your previous assignment?
Do you know what I always tell folks? Is that the big difference for me is territory. Because in Fort Worth, I had 25,000 square miles I was responsible for. It's a diocese that I really grew in love with the people. I really learned a lot about being a pastor of a huge diocese. I learned how to minister in with many ethnic groups, Vietnamese, Hispanics, Tongans, Koreans, Filipinos, all that in Fort Worth in Texas. And then here, I come here, the same ethnic groups, but double the Catholic population, but 730 square miles as opposed to 25,000 square miles.
Wow.
So that's the big difference to me.
It's a more digestible imprint for you.
Well, it's easier to get to places and see multiple things in one day. In Texas, I'd have to do it over 2 days or something.
Now, and as you referenced a minute ago, half of your flock here is Asian and Latino. How has that, that prep time in Fort Worth prepared you for this? And is there anything of your lab training that you tap into today?
Okay, I would say when I was in Fort Worth, we had 4 Vietnamese parishes. So I was able to learn and understand to some level the Vietnamese culture and to be able to learn some Vietnamese, liturgical Vietnamese for Mass. So I was able to build on that when I came here and learn a little more. And then, of course, in Fort Worth, I knew Spanish when I arrived there, but I was able to use it all the time there. And then here, it's casi lo mismo. I use it a lot here. So that was good preparation. And then my lab tech training, you know, I spent a lot of my life around a hospital. And so here, if I have time, I visit the hospitals. And so that's still part of my life. And having had that background in med tech, it gives me some sense of medical ethics and all those sort of things as well. So all that comes into play.
Yeah, well, we certainly have seen it in so many ways in your ministry. Talking to people here in Orange County, they tell me, and they refer to you as the bishop of the people. And the reason they say that is because, and I'm quoting a number of folks, not just one or two, who say, you turn around, Bishop Vann's at a parish. You go over here, he's at a parish cookout. You turn around, he's doing a funeral. He's everywhere. He seems to be everywhere. Now, as I've dug into this, it seems these parish visits are not just drop-bys. You don't just say hello, take a few pictures in a Mass, and you're out. You stay. I mean, you have dinner, you have lunch. In some cases, you're spending the night at the rectory. Why do you do that?
I would chalk it up to maybe a couple different sources. First of all, my mother and father raised us to always be concerned about others. My mother was a maternity nurse, took care of mothers and families. My father was a postal worker. They always were in service to others. I grew up in a wonderful parish in Springfield, Illinois, St. Agnes. Had a good example of the priests and all that, so I was always comfortable in a parochial environment. The bishop that ordained me many years ago now, Bishop Nicholas, was very much a people person, was always out in parishes. So I kind of had that as a role model pretty early on. And then my years as a pastor, Blessed Sacrament, Auburn, all these, Decatur, all these places taught me the importance of being a pastor and being present. So I kind of learned over the years what a pastor was for me.
Right.
And then that became then sort of my frame of reference when I became the Bishop of Fort Worth. I mean, you'll recall that I was supposed to be in the coadjutor. It didn't happen. I became the bishop right away. So what did I have to fall back on was my years as a pastor. So that's kind of what was my kind of rule and guide in my life. And I've worked to always keep that as a part of my life ever since.
No, but I found that interesting and almost unique that the bishop goes and spends the night at the various rectories. Is that to get a better sense of the clergy and as well as the people? Well,
what, you know, you can look at that 2 levels. What's prescribed for a bishop is parish visitations. If you look in the Code of Canon Law, you're supposed to do that. And so the best way to do that is to spend the week in a parish. So you have evening Mass. So you have dinner with the priest. So you meet the staff and take your time. And then the next day I have all the Masses and go to whatever socials and then visit the sick. I mean, so it's kind of, for me, it works that well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to talk about this amazing facility here, which is the new Christ Cathedral facility. And you've got an academy here and your chancery offices. There's this cultural center. There's so much happening here. I want to talk specifically first about the renowned Crystal Cathedral. Anybody who knows the Hour of Power and saw Reverend Schuller all those years, they know it. Would this have been your choice for a place of Catholic worship initially?
Let me put this in this context. Any assignment in my life as a priest and a bishop, I've never asked for. Everything's come to me. So I accept it as, this is where the Lord wants me to be. And in fact, there's a bit of a funny story. I was here in August of 2012 for the Knights of Columbus Supreme Convention. I came with my priest secretary from Fort Worth, and we got to tour the campus, and I met some of the folks. And I thought, this is a great place. I thought, this is huge. It's beautiful. What an opportunity. I thought, this is going to be a lot of work for whoever inherits it, because I knew Bishop Brown well, who was going to retire. Well, lo and behold, 4 weeks later, I get the phone call that I'm coming here. So.
And you'd already taken the tour, thank God.
I had already taken the tour of it.
What are you doing to the interior of the Crystal Cathedral? Because it is so bright. It is not exactly a place amenable to shadow and mystery and solitude. What are you going to do?
Well, of course, the polity would be more congregational or Baptist or that sort of thing. And so if you're looking right now, for example, you'll see the seats aren't there and the organ's gone. The organ has gone back to Padua, Italy to be actually restored. I went to Padua to sign the contract at the Basilica of San Antonio.
Tough job.
Yeah, so I did that. But as well, we have what we call an Art and Architectural Renovation Committee, and that is working with Brother William Wolger out of Omaha, who has a very Catholic sense of things, and then 2 architects, one for the inside and one for the outside. And we're in the process of the renderings, and so it really is like taking a blank slate. How do you take what had been a polity that was preaching to one that's sacramental and mystery and sign and symbol? And the drawings will be done, I think, probably early this summer, I hope, perhaps. But I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, because I'm involved in a lot of things.
We'll be amazed to see what happens in the years to come.
Yes.
This is a multi-year project, right?
It's a multi-year project, certainly. I think we're thinking maybe 2016 to have it completed.
But there was no cathedral here for the diocese?
No, because, you know, if you look at the history of how dioceses are made,
right.
Very similar in Fort Worth, because Fort Worth was created in 69 off of Dallas. Here it's 76 off of Los Angeles. The newer dioceses take a parish church and designate that at the cathedral. I see. So in Fort Worth it became St. Patrick's. Here it became Holy Family in Orange. So you have a parish church that, of course, is the cathedral, but in the kind of the sense of the diocese, most people, it's still a parish church. So this then makes really a statement that this is a center for unity, art, music, welcome, faith, evangelization, and everything. No, it's amazing. I want to shift gears a little bit, talk about your chairmanship of the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. Certainly. Now, this is a network of some 250 plus Catholic outreaches. Right. Why is the church engaged in that work? And give us some sense of what those organizations do. Well, I am still learning, because I just took it over for my first meeting last week. I would say about a year ago, Cardinal Dolan called me and said, would you take this over? He says, you had experience in Texas. He said, now I have experience in California with so many immigrant groups. He said, I think you'd be suited for that. So I said, well, and Tim's been a friend of mine for years. I said, well, let me kind of think about that. So he asked me a second time. So I said, yes, I would do that. So I had experience with clinic, as we call it before, when I was in Texas, because part of the challenge these days is having religious workers come up and minister to the people. Right. So you have to get what's called an F1 visa for students or an R1, those sort of things. It's very complex, labor-intensive work, and clinic did that for us. I see. So I knew some of what they do. So part of it is helping priests and religious come up here to minister. It's a big part of it. Another one is working with refugees and those sorts of things. So I'm just kind of learning everything that they do. And we had our first board meeting last week. Given what we've seen with the interaction between the church and the federal government vis-a-vis health care, why is the church so insistent and consistently going to the government for relief for immigrants and for these Catholic organizations that are helping them? Let me speak to that as a pastor from my experience. For example, I tell you, I went to Ghana 4 or 5 years ago because I had a relationship with Archbishop Sarpong in Kumasi, who I knew because there were a lot of Ghanaians in Fort Worth. I had a meeting with the religious, with the priests, with the laity in the parish, in the cathedral. First question I ask is, how are you helping our families in Ghana who need help, who have problems with visas? How are you, Bishop, helping them? Then another, I've known several families who over the years have a number of children, but they live in constant fear of being deported and traveling any place. And so they want to be fully contributing members to this country that they love, like my Irish ancestors did. So I always approach that as a pastor. What can I do? How can we work together to try to take care of them spiritually, but also kind of help do what we can to try to rectify these situations?
Yeah. Yeah, we hear from people all the time in the emails. This is such a delicate subject. It has risen and fallen many times on Capitol Hill. People ask the question, doesn't the church have an obligation, and isn't it going about its work to minister to these people, regardless of whether they're documented or undocumented? And doesn't the government have a separate role to control its borders and regulate immigration?
Again, what do you say to families that you meet when you say, Father, how can you help me? Father, we need help. We live in fear. What can you do to help us with this?
Yeah. And you feel the government is really the only, you have to.
I feel we have to keep our mind on how do we help these folks best as pastors who people care for souls and bodies to provide for them, to help them to live freely and not in fear.
Tell me about this mental health gathering that you and Rick Warren are doing here in Orange. This is extraordinary. It's the first time the diocese and Saddleback Church, this large evangelical church, have collaborated on a project. Why this one?
Well, let me kind of put this in a larger context. I've always been involved in ecumenical relationships, usually wherever I've been. But I came here to Orange and found a great network of ecumenical relationships, thanks to Bishop Brown and the ecumenical vicars who have worked with this for over years. Sure. So Rick, in fact, was at my installation. And so we met shortly after that, sort of kept in touch. Then when his son committed suicide, I called him. And I would really call he and Kay just to check in on them monthly, every couple of weeks. They didn't have to respond back, but I called them. So he and I began to talk about all this afterwards. And so we kind of thought together, given the good relationships that are here in Orange County anyway between churches, how can we do something together? How can we do something that contributes to ourselves, Saddleback and ourselves, and NAMI, doing something that in common we can help those who struggle with these things.
What was your personal attachment and experience with this issue of mental health? I know as a pastor you encountered a number of people, particularly early in your ministry.
Yeah, well, I would say primarily, again, as a pastor, you know, so often people will come to the rectory, how can you help us? When you work with the homeless, you see folks who struggle, they, you know, obviously, and then folks who struggle with depression and other things. And, you know, I think I've said, one of the first things I had to do as a newly ordained deacon in 1980, first funeral I ever preached was a person who committed suicide. That was, Father said, this is what we're doing this week. So I did. So I had to deal with that and the family and everything, and then other things as well.
Yeah, so this conference is an attempt to do what?
The conference is how to help and equip, say, pastoral workers, church workers, parish workers, to be able to respond in a way that's helpful to make good referrals and appropriate referrals. Because so often when they would come or call, you don't know what to do. I would say here one of the things that we're doing is we're continuing the Hope line that Reverend Schuler had, a 24-hour line where people call in when they have concerns about taking their life. Wow. It's called the Hope line. So Reverend Schuler had that, and we're keeping it up.
Well, that is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And be sure to join us next week when my guest will be author and parenting expert Mary Beth Hicks, and much more. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.